Hi everybody. I thought now would be a good opportunity to go through Elizabeth the First middle way. This is a lesson that I did for year 8 not long ago. So obviously I'm assuming that your class will have done a previous lesson on Elizabeth. So the do now is what can you remember about her from our introduction. So for me we did Bloody Mary or Mary the First, and then we went into briefly looking at Elizabeth and her childhood. So now is an opportunity for a think, pair, share. So moving on from that, it's just a quick recap. So Mary the First died in November of 1558. She left the throne to Elizabeth because she didn't have any heirs. Elizabeth was different to Mary in a lot of ways, and she's famous for quite a few things, which includes leading the Spanish Armada, returning England to Protestantism, and for being the, quote, Virgin Queen. And then I have a textbook task here where it says, what can we tell about a young Bess? And it's essentially the table of kind of her class timetable, I suppose, as a young girl. So essentially what they should get from this is that she spent a lot of time studying. She was incredibly clever. She was quite lonely, but that, she was intelligent. She knew lots of languages and so on. So religious settlement is the first thing that we cover. So Elizabeth did not want to cause the bloody chaos that had ensued in her sister's reign because of religion. So she was not devout like Mary had been to her faith, and this resulted in what we know as the religious settlement. So this diagram is for your students to copy. I believe it's off BBC Bite Size, which I really do like their diagrams. So you have the religious settlement of 1559. So Mary obviously had been a Catholic, an incredibly devout one. Elizabeth was a Protestant, but she did have leniency for Catholics in a lot of ways. So here we have 9 different things. So everyone had to attend church on a Sunday. Church services were in English. Both Catholic and Protestant views on Holy Communion were acceptable. Vicars could get married. Simple vestments and candles were to be used at church during services. The Pope had no power in England, and Elizabeth appointed all the bishops. She also adopted the title Supreme Governor instead of Supreme Head, like Henry VIII had had. Gradually, over time, all stained glass windows, crucifixes and statues were removed from churches, and praying for the dead was also banned. So a nice way to round this off and make sure that they understand what they have copied down is to get your students to categorise these into clearly Protestant instructions versus leniency to Catholics. And there are a few in here that show she is lenient to Catholics, such as the Holy Communion point on number 3. Number 7 as well is a good one about being Supreme Head instead of Supreme Governor of the Church. So there's quite a few things you could talk about here. So this is the task opportunity. So again, is a textbook. This one seems to be a textbook heavy lesson. I don't typically do that. So copy down the 4 boxes about a compromise with Catholics. Now this is a very simple task, and it would have taken them about 3 minutes. So it was just about ways that Elizabeth compromised with Catholics. When finished, this was more of a fun task, so they get into pairs, and one of them is Mary the First, the other one is Elizabeth the First, and they can argue why their religious policies are better. And then you can ask people to discuss the points that they've made with the class. And then thirdly is why was it called Elizabeth's Middle Way, and to answer in full sentences. Again, most people won't get onto this because of these 2, so it depends how long you're giving for the task. This was just to help people remember how people had been leaning in terms of their religious values. So this one's quite fun. It's a bit text heavy, but this is Puritans versus Catholics. So Puritans Puritanism, now this is a lot of text, and obviously Oliver Cromwell is not during the Tudor period. He becomes relevant in the Stuart period, which is after the Tudors, but he is a good example if you want to draw on any prior knowledge from your students of a famous or infamous Puritan. So the highlighted parts are the main key points of each bullet point, and the way that I tend to do this is the HPA students tend to write down as much as they can. Obviously you've got your lower attaining students who will just listen, so it's up to you how you'd like them to do this. Typically I ask them to write down specific things if I want them to, so we look at what Puritanism actually is, the fact that Puritans had been in exile for a long time and began to return, and that initially they did accept the religious settlement, but over time that became less and less agreeable for them. And that they generally didn't actually instigate physical plots to overthrow Elizabeth or destabilise England. A lot of this was to do with, arguing in Parliament, essentially, which we see a lot of in the Stuart period. And a lot of the time we find that Puritans tend to sort of avoid actually getting involved with physically overthrowing a monarch, such as Charles, who says, he goes and he finds that the birds have flown, but obviously that's after the Tudors. So Robert Dudley and Sir Francis Walsingham, they are Puritans, which are key things that you could note, is that Elizabeth does have Puritan advisors, and obviously she doesn't welcome Puritans' challenge to her authority, even though they are not particularly threatening in comparison to extreme Catholics, which we see here. So these are less points. I personally work in a Catholic school, so this is, it's interesting. Obviously it depends on where you teach, how your students are going to interpret these things. So we've got here kind of leading up to the Spanish Armada, the Papal Bull of Excommunication, secret missionary work, Mary Queen of Scots, and so on and so on. So the school I work at, the patron saint is St Nicholas Owen, who was a maker of priest holes. So again, it just depends what kind of focus you want your lesson to have, but obviously keeping it as factual as possible. So this is just a quick video on YouTube which they can do, and it's not completely necessary. You don't have to do that. So if you wanted to, you could exit the PowerPoint here, but really I do have a rapid test round, and they have 8 minutes. I did this at Christmas time, hence the gingerbread countdown timer. So you've got 8 questions here, and then as you go on you have got the answers. So what were the 2 things mentioned that caused issue for Puritans? Vestments and crucifixes. What was the thing she did not get rid of because only 37 priests quit about it? Was vestments. What was happening to Protestants in Europe during the Counter-Reformation, which obviously you all need to have gone over with them as a keyword, is that they were being burnt and charged with heresy. A recusant, again, is something that you would need to go over with your students, so someone who practices Catholicism in secret. What can you say about priest holes? And again, this one is because I work in a Catholic school. Why are Puritans easier to do with Catholics? Because they're not as great in number, including recusants, and also they're not, physically overthrowing Elizabeth. And how many nobles and gentry were recusants, which is a third, and much of the gentry. And lastly, what did the Pope say that allowed Catholics to sort of rebel against Elizabeth and her Protestant ways, which is he said he would not hold them to account for going against her religious settlement. And that was the end of the lesson. So it's kind of an overview. It is not a mega in-depth lesson, but I hope that it kind of gave you maybe some ideas as to what you might want to do with your students going forward. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video. Bye.